Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
All right, so today's message is called, Would You Be Made Whole? This comes from one of the healing stories of Jesus in his earthly ministry. It's only recorded in one place in the Gospels, in the Gospel of John, chapter 5. And I was going to tell it, but I actually want to read it. It's only 9 verses, so if you would just allow me, this is the New International Version of the Holy Bible. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. And here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. And one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked them, He said this, "Do you want to get well?" And in the King James, it's, "Would you be made whole?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me get into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And at once the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and he walked. Very strange story, beautiful story. Verses 3 and 4 are absent in the reading I just gave, and that's because scholars have determined that those verses were added much later. And in those verses, what it says is that it was known that an angel would descend into the water, into the pool, and trouble the water. And the first person to get there would receive a healing. So, yeah, it gets even stranger, doesn't it? So the verses, they've kept the numbering system of the verses intact, but most of the modern translations do not include those verses about the angel and troubling the water. But it's such an interesting story that this man, 38 years paralyzed, we don't know how old he was, but life expectancy being quite short in those days, he was probably paralyzed at a very young age. And for years, in my imagination, he had been by that pool, wanting to be restored to his ability to move about his life and trusting that this is possible if he could just get to the water. And then one day, a day like every other day, but Jesus of Nazareth walks by and notices him and walks over to him and asks a question. We've been talking a lot about the way Jesus taught and Jesus worked from the historical record, both the scripture and what others have brought to the information we have about him, and also to the way that rabbis often taught and still teach. It wasn't always standing high on the mountain telling people what to do. It was to ask a really good question. So Jesus sees this man, he finds out he'd been there, and his question was, would you be made whole? In metaphysical Bible interpretation, what we seek to do is place ourselves in the story and find out its personal meaning, not just the story of this ancient teacher in an ancient land, but for me today, how am I a part of this? So the question I would ask you is, where in your life are you in a pattern of paralysis? Where have you been stuck in a way of thinking or identity or being that is getting you nowhere and fast, and yet you're staying in this pattern? And imagine now that the Christ, the energy of oneness, wholeness, creative possibility is before you and within you saying, would you be made whole? Would you have this be different? How do you answer? Well, you all do, but this guy didn't. Do you remember what he said in the story? He said, I don't have anybody to help me. I don't have what I need to get through this thing I need to get through. I am up the creek without a paddle again. You know which creek I'm talking about. I see I've been away from church. I might let something slip today. I got to be careful. And isn't that what we do sometimes? We have our excuses. We have our story. If you knew my childhood, if you knew the way I was raised, you would know why I'm stuck here. And it says that Jesus paid no attention to the story, actually. It's like, oh, well, thanks for answering my question. Move on. He just said, get up. Rise. Rise. We think about up and down. We use all these spatial metaphors to describe the spiritual reality, which is not bound by space and time. So if you think about walking into a forest, our eyes go up, and there's something about that upward feeling. Takes us away from the ground to something higher. And there's something in us that just rises like that. That's why all of the great cathedrals are built with this incredible verticality. There's something by just taking this idea of rising from the condition to what is beyond, possibility gets ignited in our hearts and our minds. And so the metaphysical meaning of rising from the mat is to ignore the condition and know that you're more than what you've been experiencing. So the story says that this man did exactly that. He rose and he walked. There is a little bit more to the story that later Jesus saw him at the temple. Said, hey, dude, you're looking good. And Jesus did give him a little warning. He said, if you don't remain in this kingdom, then you will be returned to a state far worse from that which you came. More about that later. We'll see if I get back to that. So if we're talking about healing today, the root word for healing is the same word as wholeness and holiness. It has to do with the holistic way of understanding who you are. There is a design for perfect function in your physical body. And so to restore wholeness, to come into healing, is to come back into alignment with the way it was meant to be. And in Unity, we have this long history of seeing physical healing through spiritual means. Of course, we didn't invent it. Did you read the story? Jesus, this has been going on in many faith traditions for many, many centuries, that when people get a hold of the idea of the presence and power and the possibility of infinite spirit, everything responds within them. And so bodies can be healed, finances can be healed, marriages can be healed when we begin to get in touch with the wholeness of who we are, who we're created and empowered to be in this world. You are more than that mat you're laying on. There is a greater possibility for you, no matter which area of life that you are seeking healing. Eric Butterworth, in Discover the Power Within You, he says this: there is that of you that is greater than your weakness, stronger than your fears, the four-dimensional creature that is whole even within your sickness. This is that of you that is the perfect idea in the mind of God. You are simply asleep to the greater self, your innate divinity. Paul says in Ephesians, "Awake thou that sleepest, that Christ may shine upon thee." And what is Christ but your own divinity, the particularization of the infinite source of life into the pattern of finite embodiment? It is the perfect pattern, it is whole, and it is you at the point of God. I hope you're picking up what I'm laying down today. That stuck place in your life, that addiction, that pattern of lack and limitation, that ain't who you are. It's a thought, it's a belief, it's a mistake. It feels like you because you've been on that mat for 38 years. It feels like this is what's familiar to me. This is what I know. This is what I was taught by my family. That there just ain't enough good in this world and you gotta get what's yours and hold on to it with all you got. That is not truth. That is experience in conditioned reality. And what Butterworth says so beautifully is that we're just asleep to the greater truth of the Christ mind within us. When Jesus said, "Greater things shall those do who come after me," he knew that there would be some who would take his teachings to heart and live them into reality. There's no limitation. Jesus was not the great exception. Jesus was the great example for us of how to rise above the conditioned into the possible. Our co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore, got a hold of it. Suffering from tuberculosis, she was taught this same principle by E.B. Weeks. And something in her said it this way: "I'm a child of God, therefore I do not inherit sickness." And she healed her body of tuberculosis. There's nothing magic about the phrase that Myrtle uttered, but you can feel that she got it. She woke up. That I'm not limited in the way that I thought I was. There is more for me. You all know I love Ernest Holmes, the founder of our sister organization, Centers for Spiritual Living, Science of Mind. He said it this way: "The realization of the presence of God is the greatest healing agency known to the mind of man." To realize God is here. I am not limited. I am meant to rise above this condition into freedom. So now we're going to talk about what wholeness really means. I have a dear friend of mine in this community who has just received a big diagnosis. And so speaking about healing and possibility, everything that I've been preparing, and because I've had 3 weeks to work on this talk, I've been thinking about it for a while. But I've been seeing and hearing it all through her eyes and ears. And I know that sometimes we have a tendency to take this teaching and apply it to others. And that is never, never, never okay. You apply it to yourself. You don't see someone else who's going through an illness and say, what is in their consciousness? Why are they so limited? No. That's called metaphysical malpractice. We don't do it. You're only invited to take this up for yourself. And here's the thing, too, I want to tell you. A few weeks ago, I had one of our truth students who is deep in this teaching and strong in his belief in the power of spirit to manifest into physical reality. And he asked me a question. It was a good question. He said this: aren't all of our healing prayers ultimately going to fail when we die? That is a good question. Good question. And it made me really think about, what do I believe about healing in this body and wholeness? It's a failure if you believe that we are meant to stay in these bodies for all eternity, which, no thank you. No, I don't think that's what it's about for me. What I believe it means is that the final laying down, the final releasing, the last breath is not a failure, but a graduation. It's enter in now, thou good and faithful servant. You've done it. Praise God. There's a story about Ernest Holmes. He was in Los Angeles. That's where he did his work. And he had developed a pretty good following among the movie stars in the 40s and the 50s. And he had been called in to pray for a well-known movie actor. And they had been praying for him for a while, and no healing. And he went in himself into the hospital and did the fervent and effectual prayer in his righteousness. And he came home to his wife, Hazel, and she said, so what happened? And he said, the patient was healed. The patient died. He understood that our wholeness is more than just a resuscitation of the previous pattern in the body. And so I want to tell you right now that wholeness includes everything human. Wholeness includes heartbreak and sorrow, grief and loss. Wholeness is to be able to hold everything in our lives, in our physical bodies, in our affairs, and just to recognize that God is here. All is well. So I've been thinking, like I said, you really shouldn't give me 3 weeks off anymore because I just think about this stuff too long. We're saying, well, then I was in Costa Rica. It was a retreat. It was a spiritual retreat, but I did it like a tourist does at a 5-star hotel with a spa. But I just went by myself, and I spent a lot of time in prayer and meditation by the pool. And I was, it's also a big surfer space right there. So there are all these surfer bodies by that pool coming out of the ocean. Here, my middle-aged non-surfer body had to kind of work through some things. And I was thinking about this compare and despair thing, which I've done my whole life. I'm no good because I'm not that. You don't have to raise your hand, but if you're a member of that tribe, we know each other. And some of these guys out there surfing were my age, and they look good. Who said that? Nice. And I thought, you know what? My physical flaws that I have got to be a part of my wholeness. I have to be able to integrate this. And the truth is, love handles ain't really an illness, are they? The truth is, I'm healthy and I'm fit for a 55-year-old man. And so I've been thinking about, when do our physical flaws actually become something that needs to be healed? And this is the answer that I have come up just for Michael Gott today. When they impinge upon our freedom. And here's the thing about me and my love handles. I have a friend in Reno. She suggested that I name them and call them the uncles. Uncle Bob and Uncle Joe. So anyway, to integrate. I do eat well, trying to eat better. I do exercise. I do those things. But the healing is not going to come through liposuction. The healing is going to come in my thought, in my belief, in my ability to recognize my humanity is whole. And that's my work around that particular subject. That's the only one you're going to hear from my life today, but there are more. There are many more that I work on. Mark Nepo, beautiful writer. And he was talking about this idea about when things don't go or don't show up the way we think they ought to, the way we want. And he says this, none of us is exempt from the turmoil and pain that arises when what we want is love. For once we pour ourselves into loving another person, it seems as if they take who we are with them when they go. In truth, they take a deep part of us. But what feeds the heart from within is endless, and everything that lives heals. Nowhere is this more evident than in the beauty of trees. Their endless turns of bark and nubs of trunk make each one look like a sage. Yet amazingly, the skin of an old tree is no more than a living map of its scars. Can it be that the cuts turn to scars and the scars turn into beautiful, quiet notches in which things that fly can nest? He's a poet. You see, so much of our energy is focused on trying to fix everything so it looks good for the neighbors, so I can, it's all about this kind of conditioned mind. And what is always calling us is a deeper experience of the presence of God. Wholeness lies not in getting it all looking good. Wholeness lies in remembering God's presence in all of it. I had an early attempt at sobriety in my 20s, and I was so focused on those outer things. I fixed the money, I did lose the weight, I quit smoking, I did those things, and I thought, I'm healed, I'm cured, because I had achieved by sobriety what I thought I needed in those outer realms. And the truth is, I had not done the inner work, and so I relapsed, which I was the only one surprised, I think, really. And so when I got sober again, this time, 22 years ago, I knew that it had to go deeper. I had to do the healing work at a deeper level of core identity, of belief about who I am and what the world is and who God is. That's where I had to do the work. And when I've done that work, and I continue to do that, that work does not end, one day at a time, forever. One day at a time, forever asking, would I be made whole today in this area, in this area? You see, life wants to know its fullness and its wholeness through you, as you. So the question I'm going to ask you today is, are you available for the blessing of God to be revealed in your life without having it look pretty? Are you willing to let God use even this thing which you did not invite, ask for, want, be a part of the story of your becoming? Pandemic. Nobody asked for that, yet here we are. Are we willing to have this be a part of the story of God's revelation of our wholeness as a church? This morning, I was up early. And you guys I know you're having trouble with the sound, but I actually came down with a double ear infection on Friday, so I can't hear anything. So we're trying to figure out the metaphysics of that. I said, well, I guess it means I don't need any advice or guidance from anybody outside myself, because I can't hear anything. But I was up early, and I had some pain overnight, and I was looking through media, and I usually read the New York Times on the electronic edition on Sunday mornings. I like a newspaper, but I don't like all the stuff, all the paper, so I have this newspaper. And there's a story about, they usually have a wedding story, right? It's like a couple that came together, and they're usually just, lovely. But today was kind of interesting. It was two guys in New York who had broken up 3 times before they finally tied the knot. And they told their story. It was so beautiful that through doubts and disappointments, they just kept coming back to love. One of the reasons they broke up was because the older guy, Rob, wanted to be a dad. He knew that his whole life. In his 40s, he felt so heartbroken that he did not yet have a child. And so in one of the reconciliations, he asked his partner, would you be willing to have a child? And he said, no, I'm not willing to do that. And then through a lot of therapy and a lot of conversation, he finally said, well, I won't be a father, but I'll be in relationship with someone who is a father. I can do that. And so they found an embryo up for adoption. We live in quite a world, don't we? Do you know about this? And they found a surrogate. And so they were there at this baby's birth. And as both of these men held that newborn to their bare chest, love was born in a new way. between them. So they got married in Blanco last weekend, right here in Texas. And their story really inspired me. Oh, and they're both fathers. Now they worked through that piece of it. Is that we sometimes get so discouraged by the setbacks and the roadblocks and the things that we didn't call for in our lives that we quit before the miracle, as we say in AA. And so as I'm asking you today, are you willing to be made whole? I'm also going to ask you, are you willing to stand fast in your faith? Are you willing to not let delay mean denial? Are you willing to make a claim for your wholeness? I want to close with this poem by the poet Naomi Shihab Nye, who I had the pleasure of meeting and befriending. And she's actually a friend of the family of Rob, the guy that got married. I read about this morning in the paper. And I think his nephew read this poem by Naomi at their wedding. It's difficult to know what to do with so much happiness. With sadness, there is something to rub against, a wound to tend with lotion and cloth. When the world falls in around you, you have pieces to pick up, something to hold in your hands, the ticket stubs or change. But happiness floats. It doesn't need you to hold it down. It doesn't need anything. Happiness lands on the roof of the next house singing and disappears when it wants to. You are happy either way. Even the fact that you once lived in a peaceful treehouse and now live over a quarry of noise and dust cannot make you unhappy. Everything has a life of its own. It too could wake up filled with possibilities of coffee cake and ripe peaches and love even when the floor needs to be swept. The soiled linens, the scratched records. Since there is no place large enough to contain so much happiness, you shrug, you raise hands, and it flows out of you into everything you touch. You are not responsible. You take no credit, as the night sky takes no credit for the moon, but continues to hold it and share it, and in that way be known. You don't have to be perfect to be whole. You don't have to be perfect to be blessed beyond your wildest dreams. Join me in prayer. So we open to the possibility of transformational love. God, that you have already said yes to our wholeness, to the perfect imperfection of our healing and evolution and becoming. And so right here in this moment, we find our yes, our willingness to be wide open to this power of love that is within us and all around us. Without waiting for all the ducks to be in a row and for everything to look good from the outside, we claim our wholeness right here, right now, as we are, and we bring it to be used by you, God, into service in this world. And so right now in this moment, I give thanks that it is so. I claim for each person within the sound of my voice the perfection of their being just as they are, to bring that gift, that spark, that light that no one else can bring. And I recognize that beneath every fear, beneath every hesitation, beneath every I don't know, there is a yes waiting to be freed. So right now, I see yeses arising in our world, in people in this room and beyond, willing to be useful just as they are, to rise up beyond limited thought and belief and step forward into the power of God that is within them. And I celebrate the healing that occurs in the individuals who have said yes and in those whom they reach and whom they touch. Healing is guaranteed. It is happening already. And in deep gratitude, I call it good and very good, and let it be. And so it is. Amen. If no one has told you today that they love you, I love you. God bless you.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.